As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
To be effective as a negotiator, you need to come across as genuine and relaxed and sincere. And to do that, you can't constantly be overcome with fear of failure. If you make the effort to understand, you are more likely to be able to affect influence. If you argue and attack, you stand no chance.
That was Gary Noesner on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
I'm Yael Schoenbrunn, a clinical psychologist, faculty at Brown University, author of Work, Parent Thrive, and a biweekly newsletter on relationships.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
This is Yael here with Jill to introduce an episode that I'm really excited about, an interview with Gary Noesner, whose book, Stalling for Time, My Life as an FBI Hostage Negotiator, is one of my favorite reads of the past few years, just because it's a very exciting, story-filled read about a man who served as the chief hostage negotiator in the FBI for a number of years. And he really brings you into his story. But Jill, what did you think about this conversation?
Oh, I loved this interview so much. First of all, Gary's awesome. He's so wise. You're absolutely right. We have way more in common with hostage negotiators than I ever would have thought. And I just found myself feeling really, excited and grateful that we've had a few guests on recently that are kind of outside of our normal box, a hostage negotiator, having Stephanie Fu on, who was talking about her personal experience of living with complex PTSD rather than being a mental health professional. Or Mike Weber joined us with Andrea Dunlop, and he's in law enforcement. And I just thought it's been really cool to learn about mental health, but through these different lenses, these different perspectives. And so that was just kind of my first thought. And then, the interview was just fascinating. And one part that really stood out to me is he talks about this colleague he has who does business negotiation, and that those negotiations are really focused on tactics. But in his world, where he's doing the hostage negotiating, it's all about relationships. And it made me think about Marsha Linehan and dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, and in the interpersonal effectiveness module, there's a piece where she talks about what you say and how you say it in interpersonal communication is going to be based on prioritizing one of 3 things. It's either your goal, like getting what you want in a situation, your self-respect, or the relationship with the person. And honestly, after listening to Gary, it kind of made me rethink all of that. And I thought, actually, I think your relationship should be the priority across the board, even if it's a stranger, because you're going to be more likely to get your goal met if you're centering that interpersonal relationship.
2 important things jump out at me in what you're saying. And one of them is that even though we're a psychology podcast, so we think a lot about mental health, it's actually relationships that underlie a lot of mental health problems and can help people to manage mental health problems. So, whether or not you're a professional in the field of mental health or you're just a person out in the world trying to improve your wellness and your happiness, relationships are so important. Yeah. And the other piece that I think is important is that relationships, even though we want to have the 1, 2, 3 hack, often take a lot of patience and care and curiosity and benefit of the doubt. And that is hard to do when people are behaving in ways that we find really aversive, really problematic, which is another reason why I'm so interested in hostage negotiating, because these are folks who are trying to build relationships with people who are doing really damaging things. And yet through the relationship building, and Gary's book really reveals this, through stories of what happened in Waco, Texas, and in prison riots and all different kinds of situations that are really intense and really scary, that it's building a relationship that gets to a better, more peaceful, safer outcome.
Yes. And this piece you're saying about how all relationships take like time and patience and effort, even in a hostage situation, he makes it really clear that that is the case too. And the times where things have gone awry, it's been when someone has been impatient and decided, forget this, I'm going in guns blazing.
And that relates to this book that I've been reading recently. It was actually a Pulitzer Prize winning book. It's called Rising Out of Hatred, The Awakening of a Former White Nationalist. And it talks about the heir to white nationalism. He is the godson of David Duke. He is also the son of the founder of Stormfront, this online white supremacy group. And he went to a liberal arts college and through that encountered people who had really different views than the ones that he had grown up with. He was not interested in opening up his ideology. And it was through building relationships over time, over years of time, with people who didn't agree with him, but were willing to see his humanity and have opportunities to have deeper conversations, both about ideology, but also about just being humans at college together, that he ended up transforming his ideology and leaving the white supremacy group that he had been raised in. And the story is just really powerful in terms of this lens of how relationships and connections and patience in building those connections is truly the miracle stuff of changing people, of getting people to a less hateful place to a more connected place. It is not easy to do. And a lot of what Gary shares through this interview are the very strategies that can help us to do that kind of work.
Yeah. And it made me think of some of what we're hearing, because we're living in this divided world and there's a lot of advice out there about how we can try to bridge some of the gaps between people we have differences with. And a lot of times it's like how to have a conversation, from how to be curious and see a person's humanity. But what you're saying and what this episode made me think of is like, it's probably not going to happen in one conversation over a meal. If it's really relationships that provide the context to be able to heal these divides, that's something that's going to require a little bit more time and patience and effort.
Yeah. And I have to say, pick up the book. It's a really, really intriguing read. I mean, this guy really lived at the forefront of a whole lot of historical events, including what happened in Waco, Texas with the Branch Davidians, and a whole lot of other pretty wild experiences that he depicts in very exciting detail. So I highly recommend the book, and we hope you get a lot out of this conversation. Gary Noesner had a 30-year career in the FBI as an investigator and instructor, and 23 of those years as a negotiator. His last 10 years were spent as the first chief of the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit. As the chief of the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit, Gary was involved in managing numerous crises ranging from prison riots to right-wing militia standoffs, cult sieges, terrorist embassy takeovers, and kidnappings. After retiring from the FBI, he's continued to offer his wisdom in negotiation through consultancy and speaking, including writing a terrific book which was published in 2010 called Stalling for Time: My Life as an FBI Hostage Negotiator. This book served as the basis for the 2018 Paramount miniseries called Waco, for which Gary served as a consultant. So Gary, you've been on a lot of different platforms, a lot of different podcasts. I saw that you were on many television shows. You were on Fresh Air with Terry Gross. So welcome to Psychologist Off the Clock. Well, it'll be the pinnacle of it all.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Yale. Thank you very much. It's good to be with you today.
All right. So I'm a psychologist. You're a hostage negotiator. And one would not necessarily assume that our skill set comes from the same place, but in many ways it does. And part of why it does is actually you're really renovating the field of hostage negotiation. So as I understand it, you were a major proponent of bringing active listening skills into the work of hostage negotiation. And I'm curious how you sort of came upon that idea.
Yeah. When I first got into negotiations, it was a sort of a new and emerging field in law enforcement. And the initial approach that the FBI copied from the New York City Police Department was basically quid pro quo bargaining. You know, you're holding hostages in a bank, you want a getaway car, you're going to have to trade a hostage and I'll send you in some food. Or, you know, we live by the theory that you never give somebody unless you get something in return. And it worked pretty good in those quid pro quo situations. But when I became a full-time negotiator and traveling around the country, I began to see that that really wasn't what most police were doing. They were really doing more crisis intervention, suicides, mental health calls, drug, alcohol dependency, people just angry at their spouses, domestic situations, all kinds of stuff. And, when some guy is threatening to kill his girlfriend, he's not really there to trade a hamburger for her. That's not what it's about. And so I felt we had to expand our skills. And we'd had in the FBI curriculum already a little bit about active listening, but I decided to really front load it and make it sort of the centerpiece of everything we did. If 90% of what we were doing was crisis intervention, then that's the skill set that we really needed to focus on. And so, Carl Rogers, active listening skills, embraced universally by the counseling field, fit what we needed to do very well. And what I liked most about them, they were teachable skills. They're relatively simple to understand. People could practice them and master them, and you could evaluate people's ability to be able to use them. And they were terribly effective, regardless of the kind of situation we had. People want to be heard. They want to be understood. They want an opportunity to express themselves. And, a lot of the people we confront in law enforcement are folks that don't necessarily have the best communication skills in the world, but they're folks that get frustrated by life stressors and, rarely have they had an opportunity to sort of articulate what their problems, issues, and concerns are. So instead of having police officer show up and say, Mr. Smith, put your gun down and come on out, or else we're going to have to come in and get you. Somebody says, hey, Mr. Smith, this is Gary. Is it okay if I call you by your first name? And can you tell me what's going on in there? It sounds like you're really angry at your girlfriend. And what happened? It's not what they expect. It's empathic. It gives them an opportunity to articulate what's bothering them. And sometimes for the first time, they're not even sure. They're not sure what they're doing or why they're doing it. They're just manifesting their rage, their anger, their sense of loss usually is the big key. Loss of relationship, loss of self-esteem, loss of employment, you name it. And they're having trouble coping with all that. So we provide them, an outlet to talk about those things. And, it's on the same theory that if people talk about it, they're better able to deal with it.
Yeah.
That was a long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's such a good answer. There's so many questions that emerge out of it. But I remember there's this passage in your book where you ask, I think, a room full of students that you're teaching, sort of what or maybe it's like negotiators early in their career, sort of what the percent of people that they dealt with who sort of woke up with a plan to take a hostage versus the people who were just in emotional crisis. And the vast majority of people who do something as extreme as take a hostage are in emotional crisis. And so that recognition, it sounds like it really pivoted the way that you began to approach it.
Yeah, well, we really started to break it down and drill down and find out what was motivating people. We found that, less than 10% were what we would call bargaining situations, quid pro quo bargaining. And frankly, it's okay for police to call themselves hostage negotiators. That's fine. The public has come to embrace that term. But most police officers will never work a real hostage situation. Usually those have a happy ending, believe it or not. They sound like the worst and the most dangerous, but they're not, because the person's there to get their demands met, not to die. I came into the bank today or the jewelry store to make an unauthorized withdrawal. I didn't come in here to have a confrontation with the police and die. So they may say they're willing to die, but at the end of the day, they're left with two choices. You either cooperate or you run the risk of serious injury or death if you resist. So we were highly successful, even making a lot of mistakes and communicating in a lot of different ways. If we slowed down and engaged in a dialogue versus stormed in with guns blazing, we affected much better results and kept police officers safe. But to really address what we were seeing manifesting itself as the prevailing issue that cops were facing, it was crisis intervention, just totally. And that's a whole different skill set. And that's why we made that adjustment. I tell people this all the time when there's a lot of negotiation conferences, regional conferences around the country, like the Florida Association of Hostage Negotiators and the California and so forth and so on. And if you had gone to any of those back in, say the late 80s, early 90s and said, has anybody ever heard of active listening skills? Not a single hand would go up. Nobody would know what you're talking about. And these are all trained and experienced, quote unquote, hostage negotiators. But now if you go to any of those 20 or 30 conferences around the country and you say active listening skills, everybody knows. It's become the bread and butter of the industry. And so I'm quite happy to have played a big part in spreading that word.
Oh, it's so impactful. And I think part of what you're saying is that many people may have an assumption that a situation that looks incredibly tense, that one knows exactly what is going on. And so instead, you sort of pivot that and say, well, actually, we need to understand better what somebody who's taken a hostage or is, holding down a bank is, what's motivating them, what's happening for them. And
Sure.
And so you actually, in an earlier conversation, had referred me to a book called Nonsense. That was a terrific book and profiles you. And I loved it because the central idea of that book is sitting in uncertainty, right? And so the willingness to sit in that uncertainty of wondering, like, what is going on for this person? What do they need? How can I understand them better?
Well, it is, in law enforcement, we're paramilitary and even corrections the same way. We're individuals who have a level of authority. And when people don't respond the way we want them to, we're human beings. It frustrates us. And then we can too quickly move to our force card. Oh, well, I tried to talk to you nice and now you're not playing nice, so I'm going to show you who's in charge. But, we have to learn to be a little bit more patient and give somebody an opportunity to express themselves. And it's powerful. So many situations I worked in my career where the chief or the sheriff or the FBI agent in charge would become frustrated because negotiations were taking a while. And they would say, that guy's manipulating us. He knows exactly what he's doing. So he's jerking us around. And I would always say, well, maybe, perhaps, but my experience is the overwhelming majority of these people have no idea how to get out of what they got into. They're not following a prescribed plan. They're just reacting to the moment, and for most of them, the one thing they don't want to do is surrender and go to jail. So they make no decision. They just keep threatening and resisting coming out. Eventually, fatigue and other things set in, most importantly of which is the relationship between the negotiator. People come out because they trust you. And when you say they're not going to get hurt, they're going to be treated fairly, that's something that they're hanging their hat on. I think I may have told you this when we spoke before, and I think it's the most powerful thing I tell audiences is, we would be in the habit of asking perpetrators when they came out, what did we say that made you come out? And of course we want to learn and replicate that. And the answer was essentially always the same. And it's quite powerful. The answer is, I don't remember what you said, but I like the way you said it. And, and for your psychologists and counselors who may be listening to this, law enforcement officers, you got to think about the power of that. There's power two ways. I mean, it shows you that people really respond positively when you treat them decently and fairly and show an interest in what they have to say. And we can't be rushing these situations. We have to invest a little time to create a relationship of trust. And the other thing is we have to really work on, are we coming across as genuine and sincere and likable? Because that's the key to success, not some brilliant argument or strategy that your team comes up with. That's not the pathway.
Totally. Well, and I love that the title of your book is Stalling for Time, which I think could easily be read as, we're just stalling until the other guy gets tired of holding, whatever their side, holding hostages. And that's a part of it. That's certainly a part of it. But the other part that you're emphasizing here is that it takes time to build a relationship. We love like the 3 hacks to be likable or the 3 ways to, gain influence. But part of what you're saying is we need to just slow that down and give people time to get to know us, to be genuine, to get to know them. And I think that that is something that it's really impressive to me that you've prioritized that so much, because in your work, there is a lot of pressure to get things done quickly, right? There's a lot on the line. And, part of it is financial.
No question. But, we know through myriad of experiences and studies and so forth that with the passage of time, people's tempers and anger subside. And, whether you're having an argument with your spouse or a coworker, it's not so bad the next day. What you thought was a level 10 crisis today, it turns out to be a 5 tomorrow or maybe less. And it's not because anything substantially have changed from the interaction. It's that you've had a chance to cool off a bit. My favorite chart, I didn't invent it. I think it came from a very old time FBI instructor, is a teeter-totter childhood play yard equipment. And the way to illustrate it is when emotions are high, rational thinking and behavior is low. And I really challenge anybody to refute that. So through time, we lower the emotions. And when the emotional interaction we're having is lowered, look what happens. Their ability to think and behave more rationally obviously increases. And that's what we want. So time does a lot of things for us. The only time it works against us if there's a police officer bleeding to death on the front doorstep or something like that. But usually, if we proceed in a more methodical, slow fashion, we're probably going to have a better outcome. The perpetrator can't maintain that high level of emotion. We gather more resources. We interview more people about, what makes this guy tick, what's important to him, what's not, what trauma has he gone through, criminal record, mental health record, all the kind of stuff. We get more resources at the scene. We talk to the building manager about what the floor plan looks like. So, you really got to convince a lot of people in decision making that, there are so many benefits to slowing things down. Now, we don't purposely elongate it just because, what do you mean you're ready to surrender? Well, we got to spend some more time here doing this. We certainly don't do that, but we shouldn't look at time as an enemy, I think is probably a better way to do it. I couldn't figure out a better way to title that. But
no, I think it's titled really well. So understanding people is one of the things that I'm particularly interested in. And one thing that as a reader, I found so impressive was the amount of effort that you and your colleagues put into understanding a hostage taker. And as you're saying, like you do a lot of research about their criminal history. You interview people that they know. You look at, their mental health history. And that's such a huge, important part of what helps you to be effective, what helps anybody to be effective in building a relationship, even with people who are difficult to build a relationship with.
Well, people want to be understood, and if we can sort of, in our responses to that person, really hit some key issues. If I'd say, Yale, it sounds like the main reason you're mad at your employer, who you're threatening to kill, by the way, is you feel as though they just didn't appreciate the hard work that you did for this company. And how you really invested a lot of your, heart and soul into making this product the best it could be. And if I get that right, then you're saying, yes, finally somebody understands why I'm angry. If I say you get it fairly right, but a few things are wrong, you'll straighten me out. You'll say, well, I'm not looking for credit. I just don't want it to, to work against me or whatever it might be. So it's a win-win, if we invest the time and rather than just demanding a surrender, but spending a little time talking and understanding. Yeah. And then we're trying to talk to friends, relatives. How does this person handle stress? We look at their criminal record. If they've got dozens and dozens of arrests based on impulsive behavior, then we get a sense of how this person operates in a stressful situation. What's important to them? Is it a family member? Is it a pet? What we call that a hook. How can we impress them? I hate to see you hurt yourself, Yale. You ever just thought about how the impact this will have on your grandchildren? You told me earlier you loved your grandchildren. And you ever read the statistics about how when someone kills themselves, it increases the likelihood that their relatives will too. And, that sort of thing. Time, and of course I may be the one on the phone or however we're negotiating, but I've got 3 or 4 other negotiators, doing a lot of this work and bringing in a mental health professional, to kind of listen in as well and give us an objective second opinion. Gary, I've been listening to you talk to Mr. Smith there, and here's some things I'm picking up on that you might think about as you communicate with him. So it's a team effort, and when done right, it's quite powerful.
Yeah. So as I was reading your book, I'm never going to be a hostage negotiator. However, I am a clinical psychologist who specializes in couples therapy. So I'm sort of reading everything with the lens of how does this help people in their day-to-day relationships with their partners, with their community members. And one of the things that really stuck out to me in your book, Stalling for Time, is that you wrote, and I'll quote you, that we need to do a better job of understanding that others may see the world and its problems differently than we do. And in a hostage negotiation situation, this might make sense because you're trying to leverage what you know to, save lives and get people out in a way that makes sense for everybody's well-being. But I think that there's validity to this in our everyday world too. Yet a common response that I often get when I discuss the importance of trying to understand people with whom we disagree or straight up don't like is this instinctual, why should I bother? And I know that you hear this often in the context of negotiating, for example, with a terrorist. So I wonder if you maybe can shed light on why people should appreciate the value of trying to understand people who we see as immoral, ignorant, or downright evil.
Well, I've negotiated with some pretty nasty people and terrorists, religious zealots, and so forth and so on. Almost everyone has some redeeming qualities. I suspect Charles Manson has some redeeming qualities, although they're not particularly prevalent or easy to see. But everybody, whether you feel they deserve it or not, everyone wants to be respected. And investing the time in doing that doesn't mean we let the person beat us up verbally. We can be firm, but we should express an interest in trying to better understand. I mean, we went through this with the 1993 Waco situation. David Koresh couldn't have been a more challenging character, and you weren't going to convince him that whatever he believed was bogus. But you had to invest a little bit of time in allowing him to articulate what was important to him and acknowledging it. And then, of course, we found on particularly troublesome issues with him, primarily a religious ideological perspective, we tried to gently steer him off of those where we would more likely be able to get some people out, some children and so forth. Whenever we were talking theology, we never accomplished really anything with him. But we tried not to be so rude as to tell him we don't care about that stuff. We try to gently maneuver him back into the here and now. But I think it's just simple being polite. People want to be understood. When somebody does something that causes the police to respond or causes an argument, they're basically saying, nobody's listening to me. I want somebody to hear what's bothering me. And so what better way than to acknowledge that, to try to diffuse a little bit. If I'm repeating back to you in my own words the problems and issues that you've articulated, it minimizes your need to yell and scream them at me, because I'm saying, that's fine. I hear you. I get it. Of course, this comes up in our contemporary political situation. We're in my over 70 years, I've never seen such dissension, and there's relatively little middle ground. So it takes some discipline, not to just turn on someone and say, what you just said is absolutely wacky. But, you have to turn around and say, could you tell me, how did you come to that belief? What information did you read? And then you can gently ask some questions. Sometimes when you probe with people like this, the first time they've ever had a chance really to consider the things that they're just saying in a rote fashion. But I think if you make the effort to understand, you are more likely to be able to affect influence. If you argue and attack, you stand no chance.
100%. And actually, I kind of wanted to dig into the Waco siege of 1993, because I think it offers this really cool naturalistic experiment, because that was your stance, right? Is to try to understand, to try to calm things down, to try to affect change through this very humanistic approach. Let me give listeners just some context for those who don't remember, because at this point it's several decades ago, although it's still very much in our modern culture, right?
Yeah, it doesn't go away. It's one of those big watershed events in American history. It's not going to go away. But I find with the Waco thing, people generally have a very strong opinion, even if they know relatively little about what happened. It's either big bad government came in there and decided to kill everybody, or these were a bunch of kooky, crazy nuts and they all deserved to die. And there's not much in between. Well, it's a far more complex situation than that. And, you really need to peel back the layers of the onion if you want to really understand the complexities and the challenges and the mistakes made on both sides and the good things that the government did there. We got 35 people out, including 21 children, but in other ways, some bad decisions were made, and it certainly contributed to a bad outcome.
Yeah. And I think, many people remember the bad outcome. So it was you can correct me if I have some of these details wrong, but it was a 51-day siege that was in Waco, Texas, at Mount Carmel, where a religious cult known as the Branch Davidians that was led by David Koresh, a name that many people still remember. And he was stockpiling illegal weapons and suspected of sexual abuse of children. And so the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms conducted a raid, but the Branch Davidians knew that they were coming. They got tipped off. And so they attacked 4 agents and 6 Branch Davidian members were killed. And then the FBI were brought in, which included you. And what followed was this 51-day standoff, the first half of which you were in charge with. So as I was mentioning before, it's this really interesting naturalistic experiment of different strategies, because you sort of approached it in one way. And then after you left, the strategy really changed it. Because I think it was a watershed moment just because of the gravity and the tragic end of the experience. But it also seems to me a watershed moment in terms of how to do negotiations wisely. And so I wonder if you can talk about the difference between how you managed it versus how other chief negotiators were managing it and what we learned.
Well, I think because of the complexity of the situation, the fact that it was literally on the national news every single night, and not only in the United States, but worldwide, because there were Branch Davidians inside from different countries, Australia, England, so forth and so on. So this was top of the news every day for 50 days, so quite a big event. And I think the FBI, being a proud outfit, was feeling enormous pressure. What's taking so long? Why can't you get this solved? You're the FBI. And so we ended up having competing strategies. The negotiation approach, long-standing approach of the FBI, is the approach that I advocated, and to talk in a reasonable way to convince people that, it was in their best interest to come out, have their day in court, they'd be treated fairly, versus those who say we're going to tighten the noose and force them out. Now, you said something before about how it changed what we do. It did in a way, but it's surprising, I'll tell you. It's not that we didn't know what to do at Waco. We departed from what we knew to do. The FBI had managed several major situations prior to Waco very successfully. And I would argue strongly that the problems we encountered in Waco were because of some bad on-scene FBI management decisions fueled by frustration. It's costing $1 million a day in $1993. It's tying up hundreds of FBI agents. The world press is criticizing us. Politicians are putting pressure on us. And that leads to idle hands, the devil's workshop. Well, you negotiators are in there blabbing away. We got all these guys out here in tanks and guns. Let's nudge these people. Not really appreciating, I think, that the two approaches were in contradiction. Are you going to believe the nice man on the phone or the guy in the tank that just crushed your car? And we all know the answer to that. So we were, not necessarily intentionally, but we were often, as negotiators, undercut by some of these unilateral actions, many of which we didn't even know about. I'll give you the most glaring example that your psychology friends may be interested in. During the Waco siege, there was a point in time where one of the on-scene commanders decided to play loud music at night. These boots are made for walking, and the sounds of dying rabbits that drew in coyotes, all kind of stuff. And people said, what kind of negotiation tactic that was? And I said, well, it wasn't. We didn't support it. We fought against it, got it stopped took a couple days. But that's the kind of thing where somebody says, well, let's try this, instead of saying, wait a minute. We don't do that. We don't teach that. We never have. So that was one of the most embarrassing aspects of it. But because I was viewed as an impediment to tactical action, I was replaced halfway through. They pursued the more strident, confrontational approach, and no one else came out. Eventually, the FBI put tear gas in, and the Davidians lit the place up. There's still a lot of controversy. People think the government burned it down. They didn't. That's been proven in all the arson investigations. But still, they started the fire based on the FBI putting the tear gas in, but the tear gas didn't do it. So it still remains a controversial case. A lot of anti-government people, it's kind of a rallying flag for government out of control and so forth and so on. A lot of these people just don't know, the facts and haven't done their homework. I've always been one that's admitted that the FBI as an organization made a lot of mistakes. Waco to this day remains the thing I'm the most proud of in the FBI and the thing that I'm most troubled by because it's a mixed bag. So 3 years later, after Waco, we had an 85-day siege in Montana with another anti-government group called the Freemen. And now we have a new director. We had already had the congressional hearings and the revamping of the FBI's resources after the Waco incident. And the director of the FBI said to me, Gary, I'm in no rush for this to end. I want this done the right way. Director Louis Freeh. And we did. So we followed the negotiation approach, the approach the FBI had used before Waco, and everybody came out. No shots fired, nobody hurt. Now, it took 85 days. And for some people, that's mollycoddling the bad guys. But hey, no reputational damage, no lawsuits, no, congressional hearings. In fact, it just fell off the radar immediately, and it should have been something that was heralded. But it's a complex case. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a complex case. And in the book, you really lay out a lot of the complexities in a really gripping fashion. But it is just so notable how it does take more time. It does take resources to kind of slowly and humanely interact with people who are behaving in ways that are unlawful. Yeah. But it does save lives. It does protect, our integrity. It does so much better for humanity when we can do that.
Yeah. And, in today's environment, anybody that's being paid any attention, law enforcement is under a microscope like it's never been before, with, camera phones being ubiquitous. And every time an arrest is made, somebody's filming it. And if the police engage in what is perceived to be unnecessary force, there's a big stink. And it hurts the department's reputation. Above and beyond the risk to human life in terms of injury or death. But the point being is that we're public servants in all levels of law enforcement, and we have to demonstrate that we use no more force than is absolutely necessary. If we use force and it's justifiable, the public will support law enforcement, in my experience, 100% of the time. But if we use force just because we can, because we're tired or frustrated, then that doesn't bode well for us. And at no time in history has that been scrutinized in a greater fashion than it is now. So we have to be doubly sure that we've exhausted all reasonable efforts. If we have to stand in front of cameras at the end of a situation, a chief of police or a sheriff has to be able to say, for these particular reasons, these actions, behaviors, statements of the perpetrator left us with no choice but to take action. And then the public will understand it. There's a little side note I'll share with you on that one that's always been stuck in my craw. Typically when that speech happens, as a way to further justify tactical entry, they will say negotiations failed. And it just really irks me because what do you mean negotiations failed? We talked to this guy 10 hours. We got 2 hostages released. We gave you time to assemble your SWAT team and to practice your entry and to, do this, that, and the other thing. We didn't fail. He failed to make the right decision, but we didn't fail. And I think it throws negotiators under the bus when they do that. I know that they don't mean ill intent, but it's just their effort to try to justify why we went in when the simple facts should do it. The public should know, hey, this is what he was doing. Because when he shows up in court and he's got his haircut and his suit and he's not whacked out on drugs or whatever, he's going to look a whole lot different. So, if we have recordings of him threatening and hurting someone and yelling and screaming and being unreasonable, then we've got to be able to articulate that. And then when we do those things, the public will, like I say, generally support us.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like what you're advocating for is transparency of intent and action. And that when we sort of do it in a value-aligned way, when police officers do it in a value-aligned way, there's nothing to hide, right? That the public can get behind taking aggressive action if there was no other recourse.
Right. I'll give you a good example. This is a case that happened in California, but probably back in the 80s. A man is holding his two children in his home. He had gone through a divorce and he got visitation with the kids, but instead of taking them back to his wife, he says, I'm keeping the kids and don't tell the police. Anyway, she tells the police and the police show up at his house and they're negotiating. So here's a man in his own house, in his master bedroom with his two children, and the police begin to open a dialogue. But one of the senior officers on the scene decides that this is taking too long. We got a lot of stuff going on. We're busy, and starts putting a deadline in this man. If you don't come out in 5 minutes, we're coming in. And he ends up killing the children and himself. Now, that's a clear example of how not to handle the situation. Because, the tremendous loss of life between losing the children and him committing suicide, but then the trauma to the police officers on the scene, the reputational damage to the department. There's so many negatives. Yeah, these things cost money. That's the nature of the beast, but we need to take our time and be patient and stay the course. Again, we have something we put together. I developed it in the FBI years ago called the action criteria. And that is, before you take that step, here are the questions you need to ask yourself. What has changed from earlier? Can you articulate that the risk to the innocent life is increased, so forth and so on. And I think it's important that we give law enforcement officers those skills, that ability to make those evaluations. So we don't just go by our gut instinct. We say, now, wait a minute, can I defend what we're doing? And if I can't, if there's no compelling reason to take this action that might result in harm, then we shouldn't do it. I've always said, when men with guns confront other people with guns, bad things happen. And they don't just happen to bad guys. They happen to hostages, the victims, and police officers. Sometimes the police end up killing a hostage. What was the rush? What was the urgency? What was the compelling need to do something now versus not do anything? Well, you better have a pretty good reason.
You talk a lot in the book and in your consultancy, I know, about the importance of emotion control. And I'm curious, what are ways that negotiators can learn to do better emotion management in ways that the rest of us can learn too? Because those are highly intense situations, and it's no wonder people's emotions get out of control. But of course, they need to manage them.
Well, I think that's the key word. You learn to manage it. Like Rudyard Kipling said, if you can keep your head about you when all else are losing theirs. And I found what allows you to control that emotion is to appreciate the limitations of what you can do and not to take ownership of things that are beyond your control. In other words, to be effective as a negotiator, you need to come across as genuine and relaxed and sincere. And to do that, you can't constantly be overcome with fear of failure. I'm going to say the wrong thing and he's going to kill somebody. Because then you come across as disingenuous and insincere or phony. So what I would say to negotiators is, there's a man in there with a child, and we want very much to get this child out alive, and hopefully the man too. But whatever happens, you're not harming this child. You're trying to get that child and that man out alive. Now, let that be projected in how you talk to him. And we're going to do our best to see what we can do to help this man turn away from violence. But at the end of the day, if he does, it's not because of something we said. It's because of a determination he's already made. But I think what that does is it frees the negotiator from this tremendous pressure. I tell negotiators, guess what? You're going to say stuff that you regret. You're going to make mistakes. And it's okay. How do you come across generally? How are you perceived? If somebody listened to 6 hours of tapes you made talking to this desperate person, what conclusion would they draw? Would they say, Gary was really trying to help this guy and was accommodating. He didn't agitate the guy purposefully. He gave him an opportunity to articulate what his problems and issues. He showed concern and care. I mean, that's about all you can do, and other than that, it's out of your hands. So don't get caught up in that. This comes to play a lot for cops, and I suppose in the mental health field too, in the suicide area. Because if you're a police negotiator, you are going to respond to suicides. It's the number one thing. And if you respond to enough of them, somebody's going to kill themselves. The fact that they haven't done it when you arrive shows there's some ambivalence. And fortunately for us, if we apply our skills appropriately, we're going to be successful most of the time in convincing someone not to self-harm. Well, but we can't do it 100% of the time. There's no guarantee that our efforts will yield the results that we want. So you don't take ownership of that.
I think that is a good approach. And again, here's a commonality between what you do and what I do as a clinical psychologist, because this is often the advice that I give and have received earlier on in my training, which is, you can give somebody the skills and you certainly need to show up with a lot of compassion and patience and empathy and interest
Right.
and curiosity. But at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't want to work on the things that they're coming in for, that isn't up to you. And, part of the job really is working with resistance as a therapist and certainly as a negotiator, is working with people's resistance and trying to get their alliance so that you have more leverage. But if somebody is unwilling, there's only so much that you can do. They need to kind of own their part. And so, as you're saying, like the best that we can do is do our part. And part of doing our part is not trying to pretend that we can do their part.
That's right. No, that's a great way to put it. And help me to help you. I'm trying to help you. I'm throwing these things out. It's up to you as to whether or not, this is something you feel you can try to implement to improve your situation, change your dilemma, whatever it might be. But that's just the way life is. There are people in this life who are, in some cases, not reachable. And that's not a failure.
Just as an aside, I also think these skills are very useful in the parenting realm and also in the partnership realm, because the more that we try to control other people, the more that they resist us.
Yeah.
The only cautionary I would give you is sometimes I don't know about it working as consistently as I would like with young kids. I have my youngest of 7 grandchildren is my grandson. He's 3 years old. He's going through a really, really confrontational time. I mean, you say up, he says down. And, you try to use all these skills on him. And my wife will say, this little guy just beat you. She just...
He beat you at your own game.
He just took the negotiator to task here. And, that happens. It's easy to get frustrated with a child that's creating problems for you. And then you throw down your authority card because I told you so, And we all do it. But, what's really important, I think, when you're raising your children, it's not so much what you say to them. It's how they see you in your day-to-day life, how they see you treat other people. And are you polite to the waitress at the restaurant? Do you hold the door for the little old lady that's carrying a box? So, these are the things that, you can lecture them about why they should do this stuff, and it just, it glosses over, but they watch what you do and they learn in spite of themselves. And if you're a good person, chances are your kids are going to be good people too.
Yeah, that's the hope. One thing that comes throughout this interview, just in how you carry yourself, but also in some of the strategies that you use to build alliances with people, is the importance of humility, right? Humility as a parent, humility as somebody at a restaurant, interacting with the waiter, humility as somebody trying to ally with, somebody who's engaging in unlawful activity. What do you think the role of humility is in managing a very difficult interpersonal situation, a volatile situation?
Yeah, I think you just have to realize that outcomes aren't always neat and tidy. That's the nature of being a human being. We're all imperfect. We're all in a process of learning through trial and error. As we get older, we tend not to repeat the same errors as often, but occasionally we do. I think we are too hard on ourselves. Will you trip and fall every once in a while? Yeah, just get up, dust yourself off and keep going, And when you communicate with people, like we asked all the perpetrators, what did we say? I don't know. I like the way you said it. That's the number one skill set. I did done a presentation a decade ago where I identified like 12 skills that I thought made negotiators really effective. And the one I kept coming back to, the golden skill, is likability. We all want to work with people we like. And if we can all try to drink that magic potion and be likable, we'll all be more successful at not only solving problems, but avoiding them. And if they arise quickly, to diffuse them as quickly as we can. Be humble enough to say, you know what? I shouldn't have said that. I apologize. Be a big person. So, it's all right. I'm a human being. I ain't perfect. I haven't met anybody perfect yet.
And if you did, they might not be likable.
Well, that's right. I mean, we all see these people that have these, glamorous lives. I'm watching the football game yesterday. There's Tom Brady. I mean, all the Super Bowls, the money, the wealth, and all this kind of stuff. I'm sure if you drill down to his private life, I'm sure there's been regrets and mistakes and issues. And it's just a human being. And I've had a chance in my life to meet some people who are fairly famous. And once you drill down, they're just like everybody else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're kind of that person for me. I mean, I think one of the things that is so striking about you is that for all of the amazing, incredible, impressive, sort of astonishing things you've done in your career, you come across as just a human being a human next to other humans, right?
That's my lot in life, yeah.
But it makes you so likable. And if you ask sort of what is the secret sauce, it seems like that has to go into it, is not thinking that you're different or better than other people, even if you've done amazing, wonderful things. And in fact, seeing yourself as similar to other people, I think helps you to connect with people in ways that allow you to continue to do wonderful and impressive things.
Yeah, well, thank you. I I don't do it a lot, but what I like the most now is when I get to talk to like a college group, or I actually talked to a group of high school people on a Zoom call the other day, had a project, and my wife makes fun of me. She said, I did a high school class from across the country. Will say, could we talk to you on the phone? I always say yes. I mean, what else I got to do? And, it's so refreshing to see the next generation. They're so much brighter than I was at that age. But, you try to impart some of these lessons on them, just work on being a good person, care about other people, be genuine, and don't be too hard on yourself when you stumble and fall, because you will. You'll have regrets. Fine. Just learn from them to the best you can. Try not to repeat them, even though you will some of those. That's okay. It's all right. It's just life,
I love that that's the prevailing wisdom from somebody who's, diffused, really dangerous hostage situations and terrorist situations, that, your best bet is to do the best you can, know your values, try to act in line with them, be okay with making mistakes, try to do better the next time. That may be the secret sauce.
I have a lot of friends in the business negotiation world, which is a bit different. And they're very tactical, always say this thing, always question that way, respond this way, and so forth. And that's all good information. It's really focused on tactics. I'm far more focused on relationship, because I think that trumps everything. Relationship is the most important thing in the world. So, when I became a consultant after I retired from the FBI, some wise person in my company said, we don't want to be hunters. We want to be farmers. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's all well and good to go out and hunt new business. That's great. But we want to have such great relationships that we have a sustaining, book of business with this company where we're farming that. We're helping them. They're a steady customer for us. And I said, well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you can't do one at the expense of the other, but you really primarily need to treat those sustaining people in whether it's a customer or a relationship. Those are the people that need your extra time and attention. And I tell people there was a TV commercial on it quite a few years ago, but it always struck me. An airline, I don't even remember which airline it was, and the head of the company comes into a boardroom and all the people are sitting around the table, and he said, today I got a call from our oldest customer. And he said he's leaving us because hasn't seen us, doesn't know us. We're not attentive to him. So I've got my ticket. I'm going to go see him now. And he starts handing out tickets. Now you go see yours and you go see your people and so forth. But, we kind of, in a clever little way, selling airline tickets, but it it conveyed the notion that you can't take those things for granted. You have to work at sustaining a relationship and investing the time and effort. And when you do so, it's not all about you. You got to listen to them and see what's that person's interests, concerns are. I used to give homework to cops. I said, when we're out of town at some conference, I said, when you get back to the hotel, call your spouse and say, how was your day? Don't at all get into what you did or didn't do. Just stay in their frame of reference. Tell me more about that. Well, what did he say? How'd you feel about that? And it's powerful stuff. And there are people in this world who do it naturally, and I'm not one of those. I have to work at it. There's people who are just so incredibly good at this. And there's other people, most of us, who can, if with a little effort, become pretty competent. And then, frankly, there's some people in this world who will never be competent in this because it's just not it's just not in their DNA, I suppose. But we can all kind of benefit from that approach. And, even in a business context, if you're sitting around that table with somebody you're trying to make a sale with or whatever, go in it knowing that, hey, I may not win this business, but I'm going to come across and have a good relationship here. And sometimes it's nice. You didn't get the business. You say, hey, can I ask a favor? Because I want to learn. I want to be better. What could I have done differently that might have moved you in my direction? And say, thank you so much. I really appreciate that input. I want to learn. I want to be better. And if the deal that you went with didn't work out, I hope you'll give us another opportunity to serve you. Don't burn a bridge. Don't be angry. Don't just say, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. You're not going to win them all. People go around bragging on their record like that. They've either been incredibly lucky or they're just making up their statistics. Who knows? But life is complex. Life is gray.
Yeah, that's such an important piece of wisdom to leave the audience with, which is the best thing that we can do is do our best, but not expect that it's always going to achieve the outcome that we aspire to of, the sale or the influence had or whatever the outcome is that we're aiming for. But that by showing up as likable people interested in knowing and understanding other people, that we will develop more relationships than we won't. And in the developing of relationships, we'll learn a lot.
I'm watching the football games last night. I'm watching Buffalo and Kansas City. And, here are professional athletes and professional coaches and staffs who've worked hard to get to where they got, but somebody has to lose. And it doesn't mean that the other team failed in some significant way. It's just they gave it their best and this wasn't their night. But look at the great record they got to get there, and they'll set up well for next season. It's not easy to take a loss like that, but that's kind of emblematic of what happens to all of us in life. There's things we want that we don't get.
Totally.
There's relationships that we would like to have that just don't work out. It's okay. I gave it my best, and if I have another opportunity, I'll give it my best again, but I'm not going to sit and cry over spilt milk,
Right. I mean, in psychology, we talk about it as, can you focus on the process rather than the outcome and try to hold the outcome a little bit more lightly, right?
Yeah.
And feel good about how you engaged in the process. And I think that's what you're saying when it comes to relationship building. But I think that, your wisdom of how do you develop relationships, even under the most difficult of circumstances and your experience in having done that really does shed light on some of the very basic things. It's not rocket science. It's about showing up as a human, caring about other humans, even if they don't seem like the most likable people at first, being curious to kind of get to a redeeming quality that they may have or a piece of them that you can relate to.
No, I think that's right. And you seek to address people's needs and to legitimately understand. I always joke about when I travel, I have a target du jour. And what that means, Yale, is, I'll be at the hotel bar. I usually travel by myself. I don't like room service or sit in a restaurant by myself. So I go to the bar and I get a glass of wine and eat a steak and talk to the bartender. But whoever sits next to me is my target du jour. Young, old, male, female, it doesn't matter. And my goal is, to really learn everything I can about that person without necessarily disclosing very much about me. I don't lie to them but what I've found is if you ask the right questions, engage in the right way, people are so excited about talking about things that are important to them then you just go along for the dance, and let them take you where they are. And you meet some amazing people, because everybody's got a story, right? Everybody's life is a story. It's something interesting, a challenge they've overcome, a success they've had, a disappointment, whatever it might be. It's okay. But you got to take the time and make an interest in doing that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I am such a huge fan of you. I'm so grateful for your wisdom, for your time. I hope that people pick up your book, watch the shows, but honestly, the book is so good. Stalling for Time. Where else would you recommend that people go to find out more about you? Well,
they can, check out my website, all one word, Gary Noesner, Garynoesner. It's a silent O. It looks like Noesner, but it's Noesner.com. And, there's things I've written and documentaries and links to things. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gary. I am so grateful.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.